Welcome back to the channel, everyone. We have a draft video to talk about, specifically the Houston Texans, man, in which I think that they potentially have the most underrated draft. I think a lot of people are kind of overhating a certain draft pick that I'll talk about more or less because I know a lot about that certain player and everything that he's done in his college career. But I want to talk about the Texans because they're one of the most, I wouldn't say interesting franchise, but a franchise that has been in need of good, honestly. They aren't on the level of the Cleveland Browns going 0-16, but ever since the Watson situation happened, J.J. Watt left, Bill O'Brien era, everything with that has culminated into just a terrible franchise. And yes, I still judge them for going with Lovie Smith. I don't like the head coaching hire that they did. I did not like it at all, and maybe Lovie Smith proves me wrong, but what they did in this draft is something that I think is pretty good for the franchise moving forward that needs a lot of talent. I want to get this out of the way. I'm happy that they didn't go with a quarterback. I don't think any of the teams that really needed a quarterback or a life-changing or franchise-changing anything, I don't think there was a quarterback in that draft that would have immediately done that. I think Malik Willis has the talent. I also think Desmond Ridder could easily be a really solid quarterback, but we weren't going to have a Justin Herbert or Patrick Mahomes level quarterback in this draft. Potentially next year with CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. Speaking of which, I will be making a video about all the teams that could be in contention to suck for Stroud or be bad for Bryce, which apparently are the two hashtags we're going with. We haven't had a hashtag for a quarterback since I think really with Tua, when it was tank for Tua, and I'm really curious, which is ironic because Tua has not panned out. I do think he has the potential to be a really good quarterback this year, as long as he fixes a lot of things. People forget that he was injured and he hasn't been able to grow, but we're not talking about Tua today. We're talking about the Houston Texans and their draft picks. This is going to be kind of similar to my Seattle Seahawks video where I talk about most of their draft picks. As I get to the later rounds, I less know about them. I knew more about the Seattle draft picks because they are my favorite team. And I try to do some research for the Texans, and also I am from Houston, so I have a little bit of a connection to the Houston Texans overall. Not to mention, if you want me to do a certain draft video for your team and give them a grade and really talk about each prospect and what was the thought process behind getting those guys and defending your team, let me know down in the comments. I got a lot of new people here. Thank you so much for watching. If you don't know, my name is Tegan, and I want to be your sports guy. I want to talk with sports with you, and I want to have a conversation and build a community here because this is something I love doing. But let's get right into the first pick. It was actually the number 3 overall pick, Derek Stingley Jr. out of LSU. Now, Derek Stingley had one of the greatest cornerback seasons you'll ever see for a freshman in 2018-2019. He was a fantastic player. Now, if I got the date wrong, so be it. I don't have the time of day today. He was ridiculous. And when you watch him, he looks like the textbook corner. All of his technique and how low he gets to the ground, he just has really solid man coverage technique. Now, in zone, he does a little bit less as good as he does in man, but this dude was going toe-to-toe with Jamar Chase on practice fields, and there's plenty of clips. I might put a GIF in front of you. He's ridiculous. He looked ridiculous. The problem being his injury history. He's dealt with injuries on and off for the past couple years. He even left the most previous season, I believe, with Ed Ogeron early to go prepare for the NFL draft. But when he got to his pro day, he put on a show. This man is a freakish athlete. I think the biggest difference between him and Ahmad Gardner is really the swag and personality, which if you prefer that with a corner like a Deion Sanders-like cornerback who has that swagger, you get Sauce Gardner. But I think the more technical and the higher potential guy is probably Derek Stingley. And I'm not surprised that the Texans went with a secondary player with their Patriots background. A lot of the old regime for the Patriots in the front office before Bill Belichick was making a lot of the calls really loved going with the secondary in a lot of their picks. Now you get the GM that was originally with the Patriots, and I think there is a lot of influence with this organization when it comes to that. I was almost expecting them to go with Kyle Hamilton before he fell to the round mid-10s. I really am not surprised by this. I think Derek Stingley is a really good pick. You kind of keep him relatively close to LSU, which is something that is always plus for a guy like that. And I do have a little bit of concern when you draft a secondary player, specifically a corner like this high up, when you can have the ceiling of a Jalen Ramsey versus the floor of a Jeff Okudah. And I think that's right where you're going to get with Derek Stingley. He could be dealing with injuries, which is something I wish none of these guys will ever have to deal with. But he has the potential to be the best cornerback in the league. That's just how good he is. That's how physical at the line he is. And he's a really good tackler, which is something to be concerned with his injury history. But I really like this pick. I think for the first pick, you need a defensive general. And I think Derek Stingley has the potential to do that. And it's a real big boost on your defense, specifically after losing one of your best players in Justin Reed. And the next guy I want to talk about was the actual 15th overall pick, which I believe the Texans traded back for a brief moment in Kenneth Green out of Texas A&M. Now, personally, I am a big A&M guy. I follow a lot of A&M sports, and I've seen a lot of the games, and I know Kenneth Green all too well. He was a 5-star prospect out of the Houston area, and he was the #1 overall guard coming out of high school, and he came out as the #1 overall guard in this draft that was picked. Now, there was a lot of debate between him and Zion Johnson, but I honestly believe that Kenneth Green is the better player. Now, he has dealt with a couple of injuries, but this dude is a physical run blocker, which is something that you kind of like having out of a guard. He's really decent athletically. He didn't have the best pro day, and a lot of A&M players didn't have a really good pro day. That's why a lot of them dropped, such as Isaiah Spiller. But I do think Kenneth Green's versatility, he played all 5 positions for Texas A&M when A&M was dealing with a lot of offensive line issues. And I think the Houston Texans are wanting to move Titus Howard to the full-time right tackle position, which allows a guy like Kenneth Green to be slotted at the right guard position. I also think having Laramie Tunsil, you now have a pretty solid offensive line if you do want to go to quarterback the next draft if Davis Mills does not have a good sophomore season, which we don't know. I think he's going to actually be pretty solid for him, and the Texans might be able to capitalize on getting a really good player like potentially Will Anderson. I think that the Texans are trying to build up this offensive line and this defense and deal with specialty players at the very end, which they did draft a wide receiver, which I'll talk about later on in this video. I think this pick is getting blown out of proportion. Some people are saying if Cole Strange wasn't picked by the Patriots, that this would be the worst pick of the first round. I completely disagree. I don't think it's the best pick in the world, and I think they could have traded back a little bit more to potentially pick him up, but I think his versatility and his Mallard type of run blocking could be very versatile for a team that needs some good offensive line help outside of Laramie Tunsil, and this fully allows a guy like Titus Howard to play his previous position where he was actually pretty successful. And that is all for the first round, and I think the Texans had a pretty solid first round overall. And as much as people want to hate on the Kenneth Green pick, I think it's not as bad as people are trying to make it be. And we move on to the second round, where there's a guy that I really like in Jalen Petty out of Baylor. And if you haven't noticed, they have gone with a lot of guys from the Texas area, which is not a bad thing per se, because the Texas area has a lot of talent outside of Austin. Not to mention, Jalen Petty was one of my favorite players coming into this draft class, just because I followed a lot of Baylor football and I knew that there was 2 main guys that I was a big fan of. Other than Tyquan Thornton, it was really Jalen Petty and Abram Smith. And I don't know if Jalen Petty is really the high safety that a lot of people are assuming him to be when you hear the name safety, but I think he could be very versatile and fit the role that Justin Reed was having. They need a lot of back half help, and it's nice to get 2 secondary guys that can grow together, especially with Derek Stingley Jr. and Jalen Petty. I think it's a good pick for them, and I really think it was pretty solid value. Now, I didn't mock Petty in the first round type of good value, but I think for the second round, he's a guy that you really can bring in, and he can fit a starting role and develop there, and I think he has the potential to be a really solid safety in this league. And he's a physical guy. He can fly all over the field, and I think he has really good potential. I think this is a solid pick by the Texans. There's a reason why I feel like this is an underrated draft by them. They didn't get a top Malik Willis or a Kenny Pickett, but they got guys that are going to be able to help them in the future, and I think they're rebuilding pretty solid as of right now. I also called this before. I think Jalen Petty is going to be a really good safety overall, and I posted about it on my TikTok, by the way. You should go check it out. I post 2 videos a day. Just a quick plug. Let's move on. Let's go ahead and talk about John Mechie out of Alabama. Now, John Mechie has dealt with a lot of injuries in his career, but he was actually the predecessor to a lot of great Alabama wide receivers, and he was seen as the guy that could potentially step in and be a first rounder. Now, injuries has halted that, and not to mention you got a guy like Jameson Williams coming in with blazing speed who kind of stole the show from John. John is a really rangy wide receiver, and I think paired with Brandon Cooks, he could be really good as long as he stays healthy. there's no denying that John Mechie had a lot of talent. It wasn't capitalized because he wasn't being able on the field. Now, I don't love that the Texans traded up to get this guy. I think that there was better value at that pick, but by all means, if you believe that he is a good wide receiver, now the positional value I don't love either. I think that they could have gone with a different guy, but I don't have a name on the top of my head because honestly, all these names start to blur together when you talk about this draft as much. Now, if you're a Houston Texans fan following this, let me know what you feel about the Mechie pick because I think it's more controversial than the Kenneth Green one. And I think he could be really good, but I don't know if he fits that outside wide receiver like you want him to be. I think he's better over the middle, but I could be completely wrong, and you could tell me otherwise. Feel free. I'd love to respond because John Mechie, I think, is my least favorite pick out of what the Texans did, specifically what they had to give up to go get him. And I think there was better wide receivers that they could have traded up to potentially get. And I think Sky Moore was someone that they could have tried to jump up and grab. They have the assets to do so. And I don't know. I don't know if this is the perfect pick, but I think there is some upside with him, and by all means, if he stays on the field, there's a lot of potential. There is a reason why he was hyped up to be this next great Alabama wide receiver. It's because he had the potential to do so. But speaking of Alabama, we got to talk about a linebacker that they selected in Christian Harris, and I'm going to mesh in Dameon Pierce as the last two guys I'm going to talk about out of Florida. And these are a linebacker and a running back. Let's talk about them real quick. First up, Christian Harris is a guy that's going to fit in Lovie Smith's system perfectly. I think he's a great pickup for them, and he fell a little bit just out of production, and he was a leader for this Alabama linebacker crew. Now, he wasn't like a Dante Hightower by any means or any of the late great linebackers, but he was also overshadowed by a guy named Will Anderson, who could be the #1 overall pick next year, regardless of position. And I think Christian Harris has a potential to be a really solid running back or a rotational linebacker for the Houston Texans. Now, he's more of a traditional guy. I didn't love him in zone, but blitzing and tackling, I think he was pretty solid. I just hope that he doesn't lunge as much as he used to because it did cause a couple of missed tackles, but I trust when you bring in an Alabama talent, there's always a potential for it to boom. As they bring in so much talent all the time, it tends to get overshadowed. And I think it's a good value pick for the Houston Texans in the later round. Moving on to the next guy, and the last guy we're going to talk about here is Dameon Pierce. There was a lot of talk of the Texans potentially going with Isaiah Spiller, and they went with the Florida running back who is a big bruiser. From what I see, Florida fans love this kid. They swear that he was misutilized and he has a ton of talent. I didn't love the Dameon Pierce pick. Now, that might be because I'm a big Isaiah Spiller homer, and I think pairing him with his right guard would have been perfect, but I do think there's some good upside with Dameon Pierce, and that's what you want with these later round picks. And I don't really know what to expect with their later rounds and their running back room. It's kind of cluttered, but I think that they could have a good running back by committee, and maybe Pierce surprises me and has some value that I don't know about. Let me know what you think about that. Well, that is it for the Texans draft. I do think that they had a strong draft overall. And if you are new here, thank you so much for watching. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like, leave a comment. Let me know what you think about the Texans draft and who else do you want me to talk about when it comes to their draft. I don't mind doing a full video for your team. Don't be shy. Leave a comment down below. And thank you so much for watching, and go kill it at some finals. I know we got finals coming up very, very soon. Thank you so much for watching.